this is James here with the Oracle Outlook for the week starting January the 7th, 2018. Well, we're 1 week into the new year, so I'm hoping that when you land on this video that your new year is getting off to a fantastic start. So I'm keeping with the theme that this is a new year, so this is all about doing new things, trying new things, being different, those kinds of things. And so I'm doing a tarot reading this week, and I'm using the latest tarot deck in my collection. It came at the end of 2018 into my life. So this week I'm going to be working with the Tarot de Marseille. This is a new, well, new to me anyway, it's not a new system of tarot reading. When I first started my tarot journey 20 years ago, it will be 20 years ago next month that I got my first deck, so I'm very excited about the upcoming anniversary. But when I started, my very first deck was a Crowley-Thoth deck, for those of you who are familiar with the three main systems of tarot. So that was my very first system, and I worked with it for about 2.5 to 3 years. And then I was introduced to the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition or system, and then that totally changed how I read cards. And so that was the bulk of my tarot reading journey and career, because at that point I was reading professionally. When I first started, I was just reading for myself, and I started reading for other people to gain practice and experience. And I don't know if I've ever shared this, but actually the way my career got started was as I was in that stage with my Crowley-Thoth deck, getting experience reading for other people, someone one day came to me and asked me, they said, "I heard you do readings for people." And I'm like, "Yeah," because I was, getting experience by practicing. So I said, "Yeah." And they said, "How much do you charge for a reading?" And I thought, people get paid to do this? I had no idea. But that was how my business got started. It was that fateful day where somebody asked the profound question about how much I charge for readings, and that was it. But by that time I had started reading with Rider-Waite-Smith, so I was never introduced to Tarot de Marseille. I've heard of it, but I mean, at that point in my journey it never really appealed to me, because at that point I was interested in illustrated pips, scenic pips, that kind of thing, because the Thoth deck is really a non-scenic pip deck, for those of you who are aware with the system. So I moved away from that, so I was really heavily invested in, reading scenic cards. And I had never been interested in Tarot de Marseille. And then what happened was last year, at the end of last year, somebody who came across my playing card series, because I'm still in the process of doing a Cartomancy series based on my own personal study and practice. That was a viewer requested series. And over the course of that series, I got an email from a young woman who was watching the series, and she was enjoying what she had seen up to that point. And then she asked me the question. She says, "Do you read the Tarot de Marseille?" And I thought, okay, it must be time. So last month I got my first Tarot de Marseille deck, and it's actually the only one that I actually ever wanted. Back in the day when it was first released, because this deck was released in 2010, I had seen it, and it appealed to me because other versions of Tarot de Marseille, I'm just going to be really honest, the images really didn't appeal to me. And so I really liked this one. So I thought, okay, 8 years later, I got that deck. So the deck that I'm going to be working with for this week's Oracle Outlook is the Tarot de Marseille, but it is the Isis version. It is by Tadahiro Unama, and I'm hoping I'm saying his name correctly, but he is a Hermetic philosopher. Very interesting. A Hermetic philosopher based in Japan. So that is the deck that I'm going to be working with this week. I'm going to be doing things a little differently, because I'm finding that as I'm working with Marseille-style decks, they read differently than when you are working with a scenic deck like a Rider-Waite-Smith deck. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be moving to the table, and I'm going to be filming the cards on the table. So you're not going to see me except for here at the beginning and again at the end. So that's going to be different. I'm trying something different. It's blending a combination of the old and the new. When I first started doing these weekly readings, I only showed the cards and I only showed my hands. And then one day Spirit spoke to me and said, "We want you to be on camera." And I'm like, "Say what?" And they said, "We want you to be on camera." And then they showed me exactly how they wanted to do it, and that became the Oracle Outlook, where now I'm sitting at a table and I'm displaying the cards on one side of the screen. So I only did that because Spirit prompted me to do it. But so now I'm blending the old way of doing it where you don't see me except for my hands, and the new way where now I'm on camera at the beginning and the end. So now that I've gone on about that, let's move to the table and take a closer look at the cards that will be making up this week's reading. And here we are with the deck on the table, and so I'm going to take the deck in hand. I'm going to shuffle the cards, and as I do every week for these weekly general readings, I'm focusing on my intention that the information, the guidance, the insight that will be most helpful and most beneficial to us comes through the cards regarding the upcoming week. So I've discovered over time with this deck that the deck likes to be shuffled this way best. So I'm just shuffling the intention into the cards. I'm feeling that's good. I'm going to go ahead now and cut the cards. Now I'm going to fan them out. And now I'm going through the fan and I'm picking 5 that are getting my attention. This is card 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is right here. So now I have the 5 cards selected. I'm going to take the cards up that I didn't choose. I'll put those to one side. Now I'm going to line the cards up. I'm just taking a moment to make sure that they all can be seen. I can move them up a little bit. Alright, so these are the 5 cards, and so I'm still doing a line of 5. I found a line of 5 reading that I could do with the Tarot de Marseille. So the way it works is that the middle card is going to be the first card we look at. It represents the central issue or the focus, much like when I'm doing my line of 5 readings with Lenormand and Kipper. So I read it the same way. So taking a look at this card, we have, here we have the Fool card right in the middle. So the Fool card, which is nice to see, for me it represents new things, new beginnings, new experiences, a fresh start, a clean slate, all those things that would go well with the beginning of a new year. So it's very interesting since the Fool is in the middle of the spread this week. I read with direction in mind when I'm working with the Tarot de Marseille. So the cards that are behind the Fool can represent things that the Fool is moving away from. So these could be things that we are putting behind us, putting in the past, or things that we may need to consider putting in the past, depending on how you want to look at whatever the cards are going to show us. And then the cards that are in front of him are what he is moving towards. So this could be things that are coming up in the future, things that we are looking forward to, especially if we go with the idea that the central issue is around new things, new beginnings, starting something new, moving in a new direction, all those kinds of things. So that is the Fool. And the only one other thing I will add about the Fool card in the moment is that it is a card from the major arcana. So this would be something that could be considered an important issue or an important event. I tend to read major arcana cards with more weight in reading when they show up. So this is just saying that we're going to be focusing on, or the central issue is going to be involving an important issue, but at the heart of the issue, it's going to be about something beginning, something starting, or a fresh start, or a clean slate, you know, moving in a new direction. The one other thing I will add, because this is specific to this particular deck, is that there's a bee right here behind the Fool. So the bee is getting my attention. So the bee for me can be a pun for like a worker bee. So this could just be about being productive. You know, this idea about putting work or effort into a situation and being productive. It would also suggest too, with the Fool carrying a knapsack with over his shoulder, this could be whatever the new phase or the new experience or the new chapter that we are embarking on. We do have what we need to move through that particular experience. So I'm seeing all of that surrounding the Fool. So again, I think at the heart, the Fool is talking about a new experience, a new phase, a new chapter, embarking on something new. It could also be travel, since he's walking. So in the literal sense, it could be travel. In the metaphorical sense, it could just be about our journey through life. And again, the beginning stages, a new phase, a new experience, right? And as I'm talking, I keep talking and more stuff keeps coming to me. If we're starting something new, the Fool could suggest that it may be moving into a situation that we don't have a lot of experience in, because the Fool can represent inexperience, a lack of experience. And with that, if that's the case, then it's a matter of not relying on maybe past experience, or that you're going to be exposed to something new and it's going to create new experiences. It's making me feel like it could be something that you may learn as you go through, right? So there's that to consider with the Fool. And the one last thing I will say is that sometimes for me the Fool can represent a lighthearted approach, because he's seen as a jester. So this could just be a matter of, as we're moving through new experiences, new phases, new chapters, things like that, is how can we lighten up? How can we maybe having a more lighthearted approach to it? It could also be about moving through the experience with a greater sense of faith and trust. You know, that kind of thing. Like faith and trust in yourself as you're moving through it, and also faith and trust in the universe, or whatever you would language the divine for you, because sometimes for me this card can represent having faith and trust in something larger than ourselves. You know, it's about going with a leap of faith, that kind of thing. The one last thing that I will say is that you may be moving into a situation where it's very important that you are being true to who you are, because the Fool is a person who doesn't try to fit in. So if that resonates with you in any way, this could just be a matter of allowing yourself to be who you are. And as I'm saying that, it may be somebody needs to hear this message this way. It may be a time for you to finally step into who you are and be who you are, and no longer trying to fit in or trying to conform. So those are all the things that I want to say about the Fool. So now let's take a look at the two cards that are flanking the Fool, because these cards would represent the heart of the matter. So taking a look at the card on the far left, we have the Four of Wands. And I had a feeling this card was going to show up, so I know what I need to say about that. And then this card that the Fool is moving towards is the Nine of Cups. Okay, so here we have behind the Fool, we have the Four of Wands. So for me, if you're no stranger to my videos, you know that sometimes I get an impression of a card prior to pulling the card. So for me here, we have the Four of Wands, and this validates deck choice for me, right? But the message that I got with this card is that, especially with the Fool being in the middle and moving away from this card here, Four of Wands, can represent creating a sense of order, structure, and discipline in your life. That's number 4. This is a time about laying a foundation, which would make sense with the Fool card representing a new phase or a new chapter or a new experience. This is about the foundation being laid, and now we're able to move on to the next phase or chapter, right? So it's saying too, like for some of us, we have taken the time, we have put in the work or the effort to lay a foundation or to lay the groundwork for moving on to the next stage or chapter or the next level in the experience, right? Because again, the Four of Wands is about order, structure, foundation being laid, groundwork being done, those kinds of things. Again, for some people, if we're going with the idea that the Fool can represent something beginning and start, this may be a time to start laying the foundation or creating some kind of framework, some kind of structure, some kind of order, finding ways in which you can get your life to work better for you than maybe you have in the past, right? The biggest thing here I would offer with this card, it's about being disciplined. So there's that. Another thing with the Four of Wands, for me, this is a card that can represent travel. So we have two travel cards here. If you remember in my previous reading, when I used the Tarot Arcana playing cards, we had the Four of Clubs, and I read it in a similar way. So this is about travel. So this could be literal travel, because we have two cards representing travel, or this could just be the more metaphorical journey through life. This is a card that, for me, in that context, can represent a teacher. Clubs is a suit for me that can represent progress being made, and it represents teaching and learning as a suit overall. But the Four of Wands in particular can represent a teacher. So as we're moving on into the next stage, phase, chapter, the next experience in our lives, he's walking away from the Four of Wands. This could be about, what did you learn, playing on that idea that this can represent a teacher. What did you learn from your past experience? What did the past teach you? So you can now move on to the next thing, right? So that is how I would look at the Four of Clubs. The one last thing I will say is that the Four of Clubs for me can represent communication. For me, this symbolically can represent receiving or receiving a telephone call, right? So going with the idea about call, this could be somebody who feels inclined to move towards the next leg or stage or level of what they feel called to do, because I'm playing on that. Or this is a time to consider ways that we communicate with others this week, because clubs, or wands I should say, I said clubs, wands can represent social activity and social circles and things of that nature. So there may be something about communication in our social circles this week. So I'm seeing that with the Four of Wands and the Fool. And I'm looking at the configuration and I'm seeing the pattern looking like an X. So it could just be a matter of taking some time and energy, putting in some work into canceling out things or crossing out things. I'm seeing that. It's making me feel again like this idea where I've talked about in past weeks, where we're taking a look at what's no longer working for us, with the suit of wands representing work or business, what's no longer working for us, and moving away from that, right? It's literally like ending a chapter that on some level has completed itself, and it's allowing us to move on. And now the Fool is moving towards the Nine of Cups. So now the Nine of Cups is the wish card in tarot. So this could just be a matter of maybe moving one step closer to something that you are wishing for or hoping for. It could also be to like the goal here, if we're talking about the beginning stages of a new phase or chapter and moving towards that. It could also be to like we're moving towards a place in life where we'll have more emotional satisfaction, because for me this is a card that can represent emotional gain, emotional attainment, and emotional satisfaction, right? So there's that. It could also be too, if I combine all of these, it could be that we may receive some sort of communication. It's making me feel more like an invitation to a party or celebration, because for me the Nine of Cups can also represent parties and celebrations, right? And as I'm saying that, if we go with the idea that the Fool card can represent, you know, being who you are and being true to yourself and not conforming or not trying to fit in, then these two cards would be suggesting too, like for somebody in particular, there may be the lesson that you've learned as you've made progress is that it's very important that you celebrate who you are. Because I'm feeling that was important to say, right? So again, the Fool moving towards this card is that we may be moving, we may be making some progress and moving one step closer to some sort of wish or some sort of hope that we are looking to have fulfilled. And that will allow us a greater sense of emotional satisfaction. So I'm seeing that with the 3 cards. So now let's take a look at the card on the far left, because this will be what we are opening things up with this week. So here we have the 4 of Cups. So the first thing that I notice is that we have 2 4 cards next to each other. So there's this idea being repeated here about the groundwork being laid, framework, structure, order, being disciplined, those kinds of things. The theme with 4 is also about security and stability. So there's something about creating a greater sense of emotional stability and security, or that there may have been emotional stability and security created in the past, again with the idea that the Fool is walking away from these 2 cards, right? And I already talked about progress being done and reaching a certain stage or level. But the card that came before it is emotional in nature. So there's emotional security and stability, or there was a need for it in the past. And as a result of that, we created, or we did the work in laying a foundation or creating some sort of framework or structure. There may have been some sort of action steps we needed to do in order to allow us to feel more secure, more stable, make us feel safe to some degree, right? Another possibility here is that the 4 of Cups can represent the forming of a relationship. This is known as the marriage bed card. So it could just be establishing maybe a greater depth in relationships. And maybe if we didn't achieve that, or if we didn't acquire that, or we feel like we don't have that in our existing relationships, we're moving away from those so we can move into situations in which we have that need fulfilled, going with the 9 of Cups. So there may be, for some of us, a need to do some sort of inventory on relationships, or we may be feeling like as we become more comfortable with who we are, because again now, remember, this is about feeling safe, so it's making me feel like this is about emotional comfort. And then if we're feeling more comfortable with who we are, and we're no longer feeling the need to fit in or conform, we may feel inclined to walk away from certain relationships in which we feel like we're having to conform, or we're having to be who other people want us to be, right? And we're at a place now, or maybe at a chapter in our lives where we're feeling we no longer want to operate that way. And so we're taking a look at the relationships that we can create a greater sense of intimacy or depth with, and we're wanting to form those and walk away from the ones that may be more superficial. There may be something else for some people in mind too. I'm looking at the Fool card and the 4 of Cups, and I'm looking at the configuration here, and I'm noticing that the leaves are above the 2 cups on the bottom. It's making me feel like the lid is coming off, so there may be some sort of revelation or sharing something of a personal, intimate nature with other people this week that's important. And it may be important if we go back to the theme here about, being true to who you are and feeling like no longer fitting in. So there may be something that you want to share with others about either who you are or who you are in the process of becoming. Right, so I'm seeing that. In another context, if we go with the idea that the 4 of Cups is about relationships and forming deeper relationships, sometimes these 2 cards can suggest that people are going to be getting together in a collaborative way. I see this card as teamwork. So there may be something about forming a team or people working together. And if this is the case, then it's important that everybody does their fair share of the work involved. So I'm seeing that. And the rub here, if we go with the idea about somebody not wanting to conform or somebody being true to who they are, the rub here may be, the challenge may be about being able to work with a group of people. You know, because I'm feeling like there may be some people who don't work easily in teams or group settings. So there may be something of that the person has to kind of work through. Right. So I'm seeing all of that with the Four of Cups and the first three cards. So now let's take a look at the card on the other side of the line. And the last three cards would round things out. Oh, this is very interesting. Okay. So here we have the World card. So here we have another Major Arcana card. And the interesting thing to note is that the Fool represents the beginning stage of something, and the World represents the successful completion of a chapter, of a phase, or an experience, right? So it's making me feel like somebody's embarking on a journey in which they are feeling with the Nine of Cups in between, that they're wanting to move towards a greater sense of success. They're wanting to experience a greater sense of wholeness. If I look at the card, this card for me can represent wholeness or integration. And that would make sense if we go with the idea that the Fool is talking about, you know, being true to who you are, you know, not trying to fit in or conform, right? And it could just be like there may be a wish or a hope for wholeness. Could be a wish or a hope for a chapter or a phase to be completed successfully. Because again, this card can represent a triumph, a victory, or success. But it's very interesting. We have three travel cards. We have the Four of Wands, the Fool, and now the World, because the World can also represent travel. So if I go with the idea that Wands is talking about work or business and wanting to make some progress with that, then the World at the end could represent one's career and career path. So some ideas here, somebody could be, if we're in school, could be graduating and moving on into the next phase or stage or chapter of their career. They're leaving school and now they're moving on. For someone else, somebody else could be retiring from work and now they get to have their wish fulfilled about traveling, because this could be traveling and traveling long distances. So this makes me feel like somebody may have a hope or a wish about traveling and seeing the world in the literal sense. And then for somebody else, there may be something more of a spiritual nature. Going with the cups, we have two cups and two trumps. So there may be something on a spiritual level taking place for some people this week. And if that's the case, then the World could just represent a new level of awareness based on past experience, going back to the Four of Wands, based on past experience and what you feel like you've learned and you've made some progress in or with, then you have a greater sense of awareness with the World. Now this could also be somebody's maybe spiritual career. I tend to look at the World as one's spiritual career path, not just career path, but one's spiritual career path, and then being a spiritual practitioner. So it could be somebody is wanting to maybe move away from work that they've done in the past. Remember, this is about moving away from something, work that they've done in the past, and they're wanting to pursue more spiritually based work. Again, going with the idea that this is about being a spiritual practitioner. And I'm seeing this, it may even be, because I talked about this card representing being a teacher, then somebody may be wanting to move closer to their hope or their wish of being a spiritual teacher. Right, so again, the World would represent the successful completion of a chapter, a phase, or an experience. It could be as a result of that success we walk away with a greater sense of awareness, because this is a new level of awareness. This could be like coming to the end of a journey, and you're coming full circle, going with the wreath, going around the person in a circle here. So there is that. It could also be too, if you are in the between stage, here we have the Fool and the figure on the World, both looking at the Nine of Cups. So there's a focus both ways on a hope or a wish. So the question could be focusing on what it is that you're hoping for and wishing for, especially the things that you want to either gain or attain, going with the 9. And what could you do to start? Because here's the truth. If you don't start somewhere or at some point, you won't have that successful completion, right? You won't have that triumph, that victory or success, right? So this week could be focusing on what it is that you want to gain or attain, and then what would you be willing to do to start, to take that one step. With the Fool card, I'm always reminded of the expression that the first step is always the most important step to take when we're embarking on something new, right? So what's the one step you could take this week to move closer to that idea of emotional gain or attainment, having a wish fulfilled, a greater sense of emotional satisfaction, right? And then moving, and that would move you one step closer to the triumph, the victory, the success. So that is how I would look at the line this week. And on that note, I'll go ahead and wrap up this week's Oracle Outlook. And there you have it. That was this week's Oracle Outlook. I'm James Himm Mitchell, and as I close, I'd like to thank you for sharing space here with me for this week's reading, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you again in our next video reading together. And as I'm giving thanks, I also would like to acknowledge any new subscribers. I've had a number of new subscribers at the end of last year, at the beginning of this year. So I want to thank you for taking that step to subscribe to the channel. It means the world to me that you would support me, the work, and the channel in that way. But as I always say, whether you are a viewer or a subscriber, I do appreciate all the support and the encouragement that you give to both me, the work, and the channel. So thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you right here in the same space again next week. So until then, I'm hoping that you have a wonderful day, and I'm hoping that you have a very tarot-tastic week. Take care.